Do you hate the state? Do you hate that vile institution of theft, war, and genocide so much that you're willing to abolish it completely? Then you are an anarchist. But anarchism only describes what you're against, not what you're for. So to determine what you are for, you need to answer this question. Is money, capitalism, force, or is it consent? If you answered that money is consent, then you are an anarcho-capitalist. So you can call me Ezekiel. This is Anarcho-Capitalism. Let's jump in! The most basic function of the state is to protect its citizens from those who would do them harm. Any man who seeks to harm another is, by definition, a criminal. To this end, the state taxes its people to finance their protection. People may believe that a state has additional functions on top of this, but all statists, from minarchists to totalitarian socialists, agree that protecting its people from criminals is the fundamental function of the state. But, according to ANCAPs, there's a problem here. A tax-funded protection agency is a contradiction in terms. Anyone trying to tax you is robbing you. They are the criminals you need protection from. But let's say that you try to be clever. What if you were to support the government that's robbing you on the grounds that it's at least robbing you less than another worse robber would? Well, things might not turn out the way you'd hoped, because there's still the question of how much protection you need, and how much you should be charged for it. Who gets to make that decision? The government, of course. And since you're being taxed against your will, not charged for a service you've consented to, you get no say in the matter. In fact, any effort to resist will be treated as a crime. Naturally, the government will always advocate for more and more defense, and use that to justify the further taxation it would require. Now, the government may defer this theft by taking on debt, or hide it through inflation. But one way or another, you're gonna get robbed. By the way, I would like to take this opportunity to say that the libertarian slogan, "taxation is theft," is wrong. You see, during taxation, the government is saying that they will send scary men to do horrible things to you unless you fork over your valuables. This means that taxation isn't theft. It's way more like armed robbery. If you want to see the government practicing theft, you should take a look at inflation. Inflation is the covert way of taking people's wealth. So the slogan should really be, taxation is robbery, inflation is theft. And the last point an ANCAP would make here is that you shouldn't actually expect to get any of that security you're paying for. Remember, the government is a monopoly, and as statist trustbusters love to point out, monopolies have no reason to provide good quality in return for their high costs. In fact, the state has an incentive to keep you unsafe. That way, in your desperation for security, you may actually support increased security spending in the vain hopes it'll save you. In the eyes of the anarcho-capitalist, money is more than just a commodity or medium of exchange. It's more than even consent. To an anarcho-capitalist, money is speech. This view is not original to the ANCAPs. You see, ANCAPs are subscribers to the Austrian School of Economics. While the Austrians, particularly their founder, Ludwig von Mises, are minarchists, the ANCAPs hold nearly all other Austrian views, one of them being that money is speech. We'll explore Austrian economics more in our next video. What's relevant here is that in the Austrians' views, all economic transactions not involving government or criminals, which the ANCAPs view as being the same thing, is both consensual and mutually beneficial, and that money is the way we communicate the value of those transactions to each other. This means that capitalism, or more accurately, free markets, is a system of human organization built entirely on consent. To a deontologist, that alone would be enough to build a moral society out of. But the ANCAPs also believe that free markets make sense on a consequentialist basis. This is because, as Austrians, they also believe that free markets are the most effective system of human organization too. The only question left is, with what will ANCAPs replace the state's monopolized services? Will there be private companies acting as police, military, courts, regulators, and all other functions that constitute a modern state? The short answer is yes. The longer answer is also yes, but to specify that these functions won't be performed by normal private companies, because there already exists a special type of corporation that already provides much of these services, and is well suited to taking on the rest. What type of company is it? Well, let me put it to you this way. They're going to make Warren Buffett the king of Ancapistan. In the eyes of anarcho-capitalists, insurance companies are destined to replace the state. Here's what that'll look like. Imagine that the state security forces fail in their task to protect you from a robbery, costing you an item worth $100. The state will not compensate you, and it will not make any effort to retrieve the stolen item. This is the opposite of an insurance company. When you lose an item worth $100, the company will compensate you in full. But let's assume there was no government at all, only an insurance company offering insurance against crime. Instead of letting criminals run rampant, causing the company to lose money in payouts, and losing customers by raising their prices to cover those payouts, wouldn't it be cheaper to hire security to protect the customers from criminals in the first place? In fact, that in itself would be a service people would pay for. Consumers would much rather not be robbed at all than get robbed and compensated after the fact. Moreover, without a government restricting weapons ownership, most people would be able to defend themselves, making the insurance company's cost of security even lower. After all, when seconds count, the police are minutes away. Or in this case, private security. Let me tell you a common joke made at the expense of anarcho-capitalism. Imagine you're walking through a back alley one night. Then, all of a sudden, you're jumped by 3 thugs intent on beating you up. But all is not yet lost. You have private security. You call up your agency and say, "Help, I'm being attacked." But no help is sent. Instead, the woman on the phone calmly informs you, "I'm sorry, sir, but you only have the silver protection package, which only guards you against murder. If you want help against assaults, you'll need to upgrade to gold." And she hangs up, leaving you to your fate. It looks like you're gonna have to defend yourself. Now let me tell you the ANCAP version of this joke. You're living in the modern United States, driving through your hometown. Traffic is bad, so before you can escape, you become rapidly engulfed in a tide of political rioters. You call up the state police to tell them you're being attacked. The woman on the other end calmly informs you, "I'm sorry, but these rioters are the political allies of the current administration. The police have been ordered to stand down. And by the way, if you heard any of those peaceful protesters attacking you, we'll arrest you." You then ask her, "Then what am I paying taxes for?" But she already hung up. In my eyes, both scenarios are equally plausible. So what's the difference? Well, the state doesn't actually guarantee your security, but it can guarantee that you have none by punishing you for defending yourself. After all, self-defense is a violation of the state's monopoly on force. Under a state, self-defense is, by definition, a privilege, not a right. Meanwhile, in the Ancapistan scenario, you can at least still defend yourself. And, while no private security was sent to save you, you at least didn't have to pay for it anyway. The next topic we need to cover is how anarcho-capitalist societies would handle neighboring states. Criminals are easy to overwhelm, but how about whole nations united under a militaristic state? Naturally, an anarchist society will require a military to defend itself. How will that work? Rather than having to hold policy debates to unreliably convince the masses to increase or decrease military spending, the consumers will judge for themselves what the necessary amount of defense spending should be. If a neighboring state becomes increasingly belligerent, people will insist their insurance companies prove that they're capable of defending them. And if one company can't provide sufficient defense, their customers will flock to another that can. This will force the insurance companies to maintain armed forces of more than just tanks and infantry, but of warplanes and even warships to protect their clients doing trade overseas. They'll also need to provide unconventional defenses, such as intelligence agencies and cyber warfare units. It's also important to consider that there will be multiple insurance companies protecting clients living in every area of the society. So if a state military were to advance and take territory from the anarchist society, they would very quickly end up attacking every insurance company in that society, bringing them into a state of war with the whole. And that's assuming the companies don't already have mutual defense agreements, which they almost certainly would in a desire to share the burden of fighting an expensive war. There's also the fact that private citizens will always be free to equip themselves with any armaments they want, and to organize themselves into civilian defense forces. Naturally, if war seemed on the horizon, more citizens would flock to such groups, allowing the society to dynamically militarize and demilitarize based on perceived threats. According to these ideas, an anarcho-capitalist society's military will have 2 main components: small, well-trained and well-equipped armies under the insurance companies, and much larger civilian defense forces whose quality will range from local militias to private armies in and of themselves. This is very similar to what America's founding fathers intended, with small but elite-standing armies being kept in check by larger and politically decentralized militias. All of this would inevitably create an extremely large armament sector within the society's economy, a real asset in case of war. But, of course, without taxation, war is very unprofitable. The insurance companies would do everything they could to avoid it. In this way, an anarcho-capitalist society will be less likely to start a war than a statist one. War is the health of the state, after all, and anarchists have no states. So if insurance companies are so great, and so destined to replace government security services, why haven't they done so already? Well, the state won't let them. Remember, the state has a monopoly on force. Like hell are they going to give that up to some damn actuary? There's also a lack of will within insurance companies to do this. To realize such a radical plan would require incredibly ideologically motivated leadership. And not only is the vast majority of the current population statist, but the insurance industry is heavily regulated by the government. This means that the industry attracts a disproportionate number of people who are more inclined to cooperate with the state than to oppose it. Now, whether it's because you love it or hate it, if you want to know more about anarcho-capitalism, I've got book recommendations. The two main books I'd recommend are The Anatomy of the State, for the anarcho-capitalist critique of the state, and Democracy, the God That Failed, which covers the anarcho-capitalist theory of history, critique of the state, replacements for the state, prospect for revolution, and even a bit of Austrian economics. Also, since I recommended Kropotkin's Mutual Aid in the Anarcho-Communism video, I'll also recommend its anarcho-capitalist counterpart, Hans-Hermann Hoppe's A Short History of Man. Honestly, they're quite similar, and I mean that as a compliment. And that's anarcho-capitalism. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. And if you'd like to help us make more videos like this one, support us through Patreon, Subscribestar, becoming a channel member, and PayPal, links to all of which can be found below. Up next, we're going to talk about depression, and what a certain group of Austrians have to say about it. I'll see you then.
Welcome to Ancapistan, where every man can be a king. Welcome to Ancapistan, where your worth as a man is the worth that you bring. Anarchist!
In Ancapistan, we look after each other. We treat our trade partners as if they were brothers. There's solidarity in the trade community. No government tyranny here, we're finally free.
Huh?